Okay, Linux with alternative co-host, because James is apparently MIA, and Commodore's been hanging around. First off, we all feel sorry for Jordan. We feel sorry. We're sorry for your script kidding problems. We really are. It's just...
It's been a really long week.
And I'm sure that didn't help.
Well, I mean, I don't know if I mentioned it or not. I know I said about it in the vlog. My grandmother's been in the hospital and found out my brother's getting a divorce, so I can't see my nieces and nephews. Fun week. Anyway.
That's right up there with finding out your grandma's dead and family didn't tell you.
Yeah, let's not hope for that.
Yeah. So what do we want to start with? Do we want to start with the person who you and I both agree is actually a nice guy and has a semi-valid point, and Commodore feels the need to troll on?
Hey, we didn't say that in the video. It's not public.
Well,
That's public now.
whatever. Or do we want to talk about, or do we want to get into like the Q&As and other stuff? One thing I did want to note, last week when I said, like, we were talking about the Chrome OS, I was talking about being locked down as an iOS. I think you meant, when I was editing that,
yes,
I realized...
I misunderstood you there.
Yeah, I think you thought I meant iOS as in the letter I.
Yeah.
For those of you who also made that mistake, I was talking about EYEOS, which is a cloud-based operating system. They're actually trying to get schools to buy into it. And
it's like one of those stupid things, like the browser links L, Y, and X, and is links as in a link. Like a link to the past and listed links, you know, two different links.
Oh, well,
It's
you
like
know,
that.
I before Y except after I. It's like... I swear some of this stuff, it's like... I'm surprised nobody's suing her. Like, oh, you sound too much like us. Because it's just...
Well, it's like the guy who bought the Microsoft domain all those years ago, and Microsoft went after him.
Oh, but see, but his name was Mike
Yeah.
Rowe. And then when they realized that they were suing somebody called Mike Rowe, and it was spelled Mike Rowe, and there was no infringement or dissent, like he like got a shitload of free stuff out of that as settlement. I forget, like it was disclosed at one point, but anyways,
Yeah, it might be sued for my name.
Okay, so I guess we'll start with that. It's once again we've done what we did in the PC versus Mac, and everybody will bitch at us. Oh yeah, let's talk about what we're gonna do before we actually do it. Well, that's the form factor over here. Get used to it. Okay, so anyways, the video here, which we will be responding to and post a link to in this description. Say, what was it the guy said exactly? It's like he wanted 5 reasons.
Basically, 5 reasons to convince him to switch to Linux. 5 reasons, if you're an average user, I would assume, why Linux is the best choice.
And, of course, the forbidden reasons are it's free software philosophies, or anything open source. This is all invalid reasons.
Which, the it's free reason, I could see that being a good reason, but... yeah, I mean, that's not the best reason to choose something.
But yeah, it's like...
The other ones, yeah, the end user a lot of times does not care about free software or open source.
Well, no, and honestly, especially free as in the dollar amount, why I think Linux saves you thousands of dollars. I think it's a bad way to convey it to the end user, because think of the number of free softwares that then screw somebody's system up, like the whole OS.
Think of how many people actually equate Windows or Mac with money, because they're not generally paying for it. In a lot of cases, they buy a machine that has it on there, so it's free to them.
Well, they are paying for it, just not in a way they realize. But
that's what I was getting at.
But they don't know that.
Right.
Yeah, they just bought a machine, and it just happened to have Windows on it. So Windows must have been free, right?
So the free doesn't really... It's not an argument.
Yeah. It's only an argument if you're going through the process of building a system or having somebody build a system for you, because you're going to then buy the OS, and that could save you money there. But for 90% of the end user, you're right. They bought it off the shelf. It came how it came. Like, well, why should I?
Well, there are a lot of people who don't realize you can replace the operating system. That's a different topic entirely, though.
There's still a lot of people who don't even realize.
They think it's completely tied to hardware.
What's an operating system?
Yeah, I'm going to say, I would argue more the what's the operating system question. Yeah. Anyways, honestly, why we get into all the open source and free and stuff here all the time and the philosophical stuff, honestly, I think a good reason that should make this list is actually the reason, at the end of the day, I chose and use Linux, and that is customizability of the UI. And that with the various tools and because of the open nature of Linux, you can make that UI exactly what you think it should be, even if there isn't anybody else of the billions of people on the planet that agree with you. The button will be where you want it, how you want it. I personally think that's probably the #1 reason to choose Linux over OS X or Windows, because you just cannot get that customizability. Because I don't play with BSD as much as I should, I don't know if BSD has that same level of customizability.
Well, it runs GTK and GNOME and
yeah, I must say, because it's largely the same packs, I would suspect it does. But so I just want to make it clear that's not unique to Linux.
It's just a nice feature.
It's a very nice feature.
I would normally switch to customizability with choice. They both sort of go hand in hand, because while you can customize it, you also have the choice of what sort of package management systems you want, init scripts, and all sorts of different things. I mean, user interface, you have the choice of exactly what you want and what you don't want.
Yeah, but that adds like fragmentation to it. You know, like how they say Mac people say the Android market's like fragmented.
Yeah.
Well, but as long as you're doing it through something like ComPiz or the Emerald Theme Manager, there's really no fragmentation. It's just a UI change. It doesn't make any difference to how any application installs on my Linux box if my launch menu is in this corner or that corner, or rather it's ordered launch menu, package manager, internet browser, or however I want it.
But if you move the buttons to the left, people go nuts.
Well, that's their problem. It's my computer, not theirs. And that actually, personally, I'm going to name another and see if y'all can come up with it. This is the other real thing I think is a real advantage of Linux, and that is, now this isn't, OS X also has this advantage, but Linux is a true multi-user OS. In other words, I can go completely nuts with the UI, put everything where I want it, and so can every other user on that computer. They're in no way, shape, or form interlinked. The different applications, the different... that is worth its weight in gold, especially if you're in a house where, 4 or 5 people are sharing a computer, or an office where dozens of different days, different people are working in different sections. That's something you just can't do in Windows.
Yeah, I thought you could with the newer versions, that where the user directories are all separated. There are application settings within each individual user directory and everything now.
They are, but you wind up with the inevitable problem of certain things don't want to link over because it isn't a true multi-user system. And why I'm bringing it up for the customizability kind of point, it's also the permissions is much more important to that. In that in a Unix or in a Linux/Unix-like system as opposed to Windows, there isn't, okay, you can do nothing or you're an administrator. I don't have to be a root user on a Linux box to do my day-to-day tasks.
Well, that's mostly true of legacy applications. Like when you like Deus Ex or Half-Life, the same game is in the root folder. Like it's in C:,
Yeah, but that's going to be linked to your Steam account anyways. So it's also
I'm talking about like the older versions that aren't in Steam, you know?
Well, if you're still using the original Half-Life outside of Steam, you're not in compliance with the current user agreement because you aren't supposed to be using those other servers anymore. But I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But, yeah, for the most part, when it comes to Linux and all of that stuff, it's separate. And the fact that you don't have to be the primary administrator and you don't have to make core system changes to do day-to-day computing, which if you screw something up, the most you screw up is your account. You don't screw the system as a whole up.
Unless you do it as root.
Well, but again, the only people who should be doing root things are the people who are qualified to do root things. It's...
Yeah, but there's a mentality like, but I was about to, yeah.
Well, when in a Linux box do you have to log in as root to do?
Well, here's what I'm saying. Like the same person that clicked yes on a USC prompt would also put in their password if they're the administrator. You know.
Well, in my household, if you're that stupid person, you don't get the root password. You have to call me over and go, hey, can you put in the root password for this? And I'll look at what you're trying to do and go, okay. Or I'll go, I don't think so. It's like, but that's me. Yes, an idiot can still get themselves in trouble even with the best of security. There's nothing to stop that little weak gray bit sitting in front of the keyboard. Either one of you have another...
advantage of Linux over Windows?
Well, that's our other OS, not just Windows. I mean, it's the reality is, what are the reasons you would choose to maybe use Linux as opposed to another OS?
Sorry, I missed the question. What?
As for desktop use, I can't really think of much. Like, the OS doesn't really, like what Darkman said, like the OS doesn't matter just as long as you use the same applications and everything's just about the same as it used to, you know?
Well, I would argue, even though this is not a good reason to put a premise on right now, as I've said many times in the videos over here, but from a pure end user perspective, you do have to deal with a lot less malware and exploits and attacks like that as a Linux user right now. Is that going to stay indefinitely? Probably not. But as things stand now, it is a plus point. And that is something, that's one of the primary reasons, aside from the UI customizability, I use Linux and all the systems here because I, for the most part, don't need to worry about Windows crap flowing over into my home environment here. I get to deal with that stuff all day on other people's systems. It's the last thing I want to do is deal with it on mine, even though I know all the right things to click. I don't know about either one of you. It's like...
It's definitely handy not having to worry about it, and the partition fragmentation, the file system fragmentation, not having to spend as much, if any, time really dealing with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so we're up to 3 now, albeit very slow 3 reasons.
It's nicer on older hardware.
That was gonna be the next thing I was gonna bring up. If you want a fast, clean, minimalistic system, name me another OS. I'm just saying.
Yes and no. The customizability plays heavily into that. If you go with a default out-of-the-box install with a lot of the major modern distros, old hardware is not going to work great. If you take Ubuntu, if you take maybe even Fedora, and you put it on an older system, you put it on a Pentium 233 megahertz with 64 megs of RAM, it probably ain't going to work.
Well, okay, we should quantify that. Should you try and run a modern OS on a 10, 15-year-old system? Hell no. That being... Yeah, it's like, what Commodore's showing off here is he's taken an iMac and frankentoshed it into a Linux box by plugging it into a Pentium 4 next to it. Oh dear Lord. That's like, but the average end user is not going to do that, Commodore. It's like... But one thing, the average, for the most part, this is not an ironclad rule, but it's more like a 90% of the time for 90% of the people rule. If you install Linux in place of Windows, you will notice your system is using less resources on background processes and all that stuff. It's like all of a sudden you have more system, and your system just seems to be a little bit more responsive because of the modular nature of the way a Linux OS and it's using.
I installed Linux over a Windows system that had a virus, and the first thing they asked me was an Explorer.
Say it again?
I've installed Linux over Windows systems in the past that had viruses on them, and they asked me, "Where's an Explorer? Where's AIM?"
What, the Windows box did, or the Linux box did?
What?
You mean the Linux box was asking you for IE and AIM?
Yeah, when I installed Linux over a Windows box that had a virus in there, they asked me, "Okay, where's an Explorer and where is
You mean the end user?
The pigeon is slow."
The end user asked you? The computer wouldn't ask you for that.
No, that's what I said. The end user.
Oh.
Miscommunication.
Okay. That's like, well.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of people don't really care what they're using so much as far as specifics.
Right.
As long as it is a web browser, an email client, an instant messaging client,
right,
et cetera, ad nauseum.
And all of that is available on all platforms, all things.
If you get generic enough, there's lots.
Oh, yeah.
But in their mentality, it has to be in Explorer. It has to be Microsoft Word, you know? It's not what I'm used to. It sucks because it's not what I'm used to, you know?
Well, then use Windows. It's like, at the end of the day, if it's what you want, use what you want. And
I don't know how many times I've had people asking me in the comments and stuff that are saying, well, does it work with this application, this one, specifically? And I'll say, well, no, not necessarily. There are not Linux versions available. If you're open to the idea of using alternative other software that does similar features, similar things, then yes, there are alternatives available to most everything that you'll want to use on a day-to-day basis.
Oh, and it just depends, like, whether you absolutely are steadfast tied to that. Although IE is becoming less and less a thing, and the reason I say that is because there's like a trend, and I'm glad it's happened in Windows users, that they just instantly, the first thing they do is go look for another browser, which is really funny because IE's actually largely fixed itself up. However, if you're somebody like me, using IE isn't even an option, because as anybody who's ever read my raw text understands, I can't spell worth a shit. And I kind of need a spell checker. And IE just seems to think that is a feature it should not have. And I desperately need that feature. So let's have to use on that. What are we up to? 4? Or are we actually on the 5th one?
Maybe we skipped something.
Let's see, what did we do? We did customizability, security of multi-user system, lack of malware, and we were talking about speed, I think. So we're technically up to 4.
Yeah, but the lack of malware thing, that wasn't one of the options. That was like the no-no, because I'm tired of hearing that, you know?
Okay.
Wait, it was the free of viruses things. You can say lack of, but they still exist, I guess. So I suppose technically you're in the right.
Okay, so we're at 3 valid reasons. Well, if you click that link down there, let's see if we can steal some reasons from this. There's actually an article we're also going to include to this. How you know when it's time to switch to Linux. This is an article somebody actually forwarded me, and I find it kind of funny. It's like one of the reasons on here is kind of funny. It's like you don't actually love IE. I'm not sure this is a valid reason for switching to Linux, though, because it's like you can do that.
One of the other reasons I was thinking about just now, we mentioned working on older hardware. One of the other things for me is working on a larger variety of hardware out of the box. I don't know how many times I've installed I've installed Windows version whatever and had no network drivers, no graphics drivers, no et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas on Linux, I will have some sort of driver.
That is actually a perfect reason for another reason, in that more often than not, especially right now with the big push to kill XP and move everyone to Windows 7, every so often, Windows just decides, even though your old computer suits your needs perfectly, it's the machine you need, we will not let you install the modern Windows on it. And all the new software won't work on your current version of Windows, so you have to upgrade, and you're fine with upgrading, but they refuse to put the drivers for your system in the thing. 9 times out of 10, 9 times out of 10, I have found modern user-friendly distros that are aimed at true end users will install on those systems, and they'll run moderately well. They won't run like they would on the latest and greatest hardware, but odds are, if this is a system that's only like 3 or 4 years old and it's just the person doesn't want to throw it away yet, Linux helps them a lot there, because the motive is make it work, not force you out of your comfort zone unless absolutely necessary.
I typed in some of the reasons we were talking about. Feel free to change them. Just what I was hearing as we were talking.
Okay. So
yeah, about the drivers, you know, like this. I have this driver. This came from. I got drivers from Mad Cats for Windows XP, Windows 2000, 9X, but no Vista or 7 drivers. But this works in Linux, right on the kernel, right on the box, without download drivers.
Yeah, well, it's like if the chipset's been added to the kernel. It's amazing how many.
The regular Xbox controller that's taped together.
Yeah, something tells me that's not really meant to be. They want you to buy the modern Xbox controller.
Do that.
Well, I thought this would be easy, but we are having problems coming up with 5 reasons that not going to the old steadfast of no viruses free, it's on, and yada yada and so forth. But we're up to 4. We need a 5th.
I like the file system fragmentation one, because I don't know how many times I've gotten onto a system and just been completely bogged down because NTFS was fragmented out the wazoo. ext3, ext4, whatever other file system you want to use, generally doesn't have that issue.
The only I think that's a perfectly valid reason. The only
Not necessarily an user one.
No, it is a valid end user one. And the reason I say it is because even though the average end user doesn't give a crap about fragmentation, it does impede system performance, and it impedes doing day-to-day things the more fragmented or screwed up that gets, which is...
One last thing to worry about that I shouldn't have to worry about.
Yeah, it's one of those things, why you can do things to fix it. It's one of those things... it's an almost Mac-ish philosophy, but at the end of the day, why should you have to?
Right.
I agree with you. The Linux file systems have been vastly superior to Sun. However, unfortunately, this is kind of a jaded reason, in that if you're doing a dual boot system, this creates a problem. And that Microsoft refuses, under any circumstances, to play nice with these file systems. And it will not see the partition. Which is one of those things I would like very much, if I'm on a dual boot system and I boot over into the Windows side, to be able to see the Linux partitions in the same way my Linux side can see the NTFS partitions. It's one of those...
but that's not a problem with Linux, necessarily.
Yeah, it's like, well, no, that's just Microsoft doesn't want to play nice with other file systems.
Allowed to access read-only, maybe, ext partitions within Windows.
Well, I can't really see them getting support for ext partitions unless they GPL the kernel or LGPL it or something.
Yeah. It's just...
Or they do an in-house reverse engineering when they don't peek at the code.
Well, it's like they could see the partition, it's just they don't want to add it because Microsoft prefers the NTFS, and their logic is, well, it's a Windows system, so everything should be the NTFS or at most some fat file system.
NTFS is so ancient, man. Although Xorg is worse, but, you know, like, NTFS is ancient. When is NFS going to come in?
So we have our 5. Do we have a 6th or a 7th?
What was the 5th one? Just so I can write it.
The 5th one you were saying was the file system, which I think is probably valid. Even though that's not something the end user would think they'd care about, you know, the stability of the file system leads for a more stable system. And as a matter of fact, I would add that to reason 5 also. General stability overall. It is almost impossible to crash a Linux box to the point that you...
I've crashed it many times. I've only had one blue screen of death in Windows, and I had like 5 export crashes in one day.
Okay. Well, my experience is the exact other way around. I'm referring to the fact when you crash Linux, the most it does is drop back to shell. It doesn't...
What's that? Oh no, where's my icons? Where's my desktop? Where's my Internet Explorer? You know?
Okay, but that's when you call your geek friend and go, what do I do? And they say, type this.
Or hit the restart button.
Yeah, when a Windows system starts getting blue screens of death, blue screens of death, blue screens of death,
a lot of times it's a boot cycle that'll keep...
Yeah, it's like it just goes around and around and around and around and around and around and around. If you manage to completely screw up a Linux box and crash it back to shell, 90% plus of the time, like you say, a hard boot, even though you really shouldn't do that, you come back to a working system.
Unless it's really just a screwed up graphics driver.
Right. Then it wouldn't have worked in the first place. And yeah, that is a potential issue. But it's very hard because of the modular nature of the OS to install something that's incompatible in a way that you're just screwed. It's kind of easy to do that in Windows. Sometimes the only way to get your Windows system back is to do a complete reinstall. And if you don't have your Windows disk, you're just SOL, unless you know somebody with one. If you don't have your Linux disk, you beg, borrow, or steal somebody else's computer with an internet connection and make one. So, it's...
Windows, what I would probably do is just make a hard drive image and just keep that saved, you know?
Well, yeah, but we're talking about average end user.
Yeah.
It's like, here's what a Windows crash
and
means.
then you have to go through the activation, the bull crap.
Well, no,
talk to some Indian dude.
for 90.
Oh, my name is Steve.
Medica name is Steve. For 90% plus of the end user, a Windows system crash means the following. I didn't have a backup, and even though all my files are still on this computer, I only have a factory ISO, and the factory ISO is going to erase everything on this computer. And why it's not really erased, and there are ways to recover it, they don't know how, and they're yelling and they're screaming and they're sounding, but I had all my work on that!
I actually got that phone call from my dad the other day. I don't know what happened, but I can't
boot up anymore.
It was basically that he'd gotten a bunch of viruses and was trying to get me to fix it over the internet remotely. And
if he's that bad, it's called, go to another computer, I'm going to give you something to burn to a CD to put in. It's like, let it run. But yeah. So that's 5. Do we have a 6th? Or are we going to leave it at those 5?
I was about to say that separate partitions.
Oh, yeah. That's actually that's a really valid reason in that. But I would relate that to the overall stability thing. But yeah, the fact that most modern Linux distros actually put the system root directory and the rest, it's like you have your swap file is a separate partition, so you can't overload it. It's a separate partition. You can't use all available space. It's a separate partition. Your what would be the equivalent of a Windows user/documents and settings file is its own partition, usually the larger one, and the root /OS directory that has all the core operating system files is its own separate partition. This is an incredible advantage when you're restoring stuff, in that in the event of just hard drive screw-uppedness, you don't necessarily lose your whole system. This leads to a much more stable things. As anybody who's ever filled a Windows hard drive to ultimate capacity will say, when you get that warning, your hard drive is too low on space, by the time you click OK, your whole Windows system has locked up because it's finished writing those last 200 megabytes, and that's just... But is that what you were talking about, or?
Yeah, and also with the partition, hell, you can even have your Firefox cache directory be its own partition.
Yeah, well, and I would argue on a Linux system as far as the partition. I don't know. It depends on the type of work you're doing, but I find it incredibly advantageous that on a Linux system, if something needs to be local to make something happy, I can just mount it as if it is local, as if it's there where it wants it to be, whether it is or isn't. Even if it's some removable drive I just plugged in from fresh off of somebody else's thing. That's very useful, and I would say that's very useful in pretty much any business, the ability to just put stuff where you want it. And on most end user systems, it's as simple as click, drag. Do you want to copy, move, or link? I'd like to link.
I think 5 and 6 sort of meld into each other, but they are at least two good solid reasons, and they all sort of come down to the idea of interoperability, so I added that to the list.
Yeah.
Right in the middle.
Because
it's all about working with whatever you throw at it and trying to do it in a lot of cases in the easiest way possible. So you plug it in,
that's
and
something
a lot of times
where
it just
9
works.
times out of 10 Linux usually has the right mindset. Not always. No OS is perfect. Not going to sit here and go, oh yeah, Linux kicks everything's butt. It's perfect. It's like,
No, if it was perfect, the Ubuntu forums would be out of business.
if they really need to work for a living, you know. It's just,
Yeah, I'm still wearing my question.
okay, so that's 5/6. Actually, pretty good reasons. Do we have a 7th, or anyone think of anyone else? I'm kind of out of reasons that I would think. I can think of plenty of other reasons, but I'm out of ones I think the average end user would care about.
I think we're good.
Yeah.
Unless you have
It's enough time to devote to it.
Okay.